Hi, everybody. Bud Palmer, and welcome to the southern coast of California, where our show today is obviously on surfing, a violent, rugged sport that is rapidly gaining popularity all over the globe. Today, we'll be watching and talking to two of the world's foremost surfers, Corky Carroll and Phil Edwards, and also talking to Bruce Brown, I think the best surfing photographer to ever come along, and also a very fine surfer in his own right. We'll be getting underway in just a moment. With me is surfing photographer Bruce Brown. And Bruce, let me say, I think the movies you take of surfing are just superb.
Thank you very much, Bud.
Tell me, I guess surfing, like any other sport, there are different styles and techniques, aren't there?
That's right, Bud. There's many styles in surfing. Two basic styles, a smooth, more functional technique that's used on big waves, basically, and also by some surfers on small waves. And then there's what we call hot dogging, which is things like spinners and head dips in small waves, usually closer to the shore. Well, Bud, for obvious reasons, these are called spinners, a complete circle on your board. There's another little stunt in surfing called a head dip, another portion of hot dogging.
Does this serve any practical purpose or not, that head dip?
No, it's just fun to do. It serves no functional purpose at all on the wave, just kind of tempting the wave to knock you off. Here's one of the top young hot dog surfers, in fact, top of any age hot dog surfers, young Corky Carroll. He's only 16 years old. At that age, he's already considered the top hot dogger in the world.
Well, here comes Corky right now, enjoying the waves out there. Tell me, Corky, why do you prefer this hot dogging anyway?
Well, hot dogging style that I use is fun. And besides that, the wave represents a challenge to me. I try to outfox the curl with my antics.
Well, Corky's pretty good on the big waves, too, isn't he, Bruce?
But he's very good in any kind of wave. In fact, with his antics, as he calls them, on a wave, you get the feeling watching it that the wave isn't breaking, it's just collapsing from exhaustion. In fact, let's watch some of these antics here in slow motion.
Okay.
In slow motion, we get a chance to look at his antics a little more closely here, doing some spinners on his board. You get the feeling watching Corky that he's just walking around the sidewalk when he goes through these movements. Does about 7 or 8 spinners on one wave, I think.
Looks like he almost breaks it up in two. He goes around halfway, then stops and makes a complete turn.
You do it differently depending on how the wave's breaking. Sometimes he'll go all the way in one motion. Sometimes he'll pause halfway through.
What's that wild turn?
Just a regular turn. There's something in surfing. We have hanging 10 and hanging 5. This is called hanging 5 because you hang your 5 toes over the nose of the board. It's kind of like standing on the front bumper of a big bus watching the white line go by. It's kind of exciting.
Any practical purpose served by hanging 5 or 10?
Not really. It will slow your board down, so it's one way to stall or slow the board, but it usually isn't done for that purpose except by a very few surfers. If you watch carefully, you'll see his board curl, or the nose goes underwater and just leans back slightly and pulls it right back out again.
Right there.
Right there. Corky really does some amazing things on his board, riding the waves.
Well, Corky, that certainly is tremendous surfing. Do you think you can still improve? Is there still more to learn?
Oh, yeah, surfing's such a new frontier. There's so many new goals to conquer, new fields.
Well,
I'm just learning.
More to do, huh?
Oh, yes.
For just learning, you do awful well. Corky Carroll, thanks a lot.
Sure.
Good luck with the surfing. Well, that takes care of the hot dogging. Now, what about this functional type of surfing you mentioned?
Well, Bud, the smooth style, or the more functional style, is used exclusively on big waves, or you try to use it anyway the best you can. And it's also used on smaller surf, too, by some great surfers. Considered the finest surfer in the world is Phil Edwards, who uses this style to its utmost.
You know, there's a lot of conversation about who is the best, but you think Phil Edwards is the best?
In my opinion, all around, big waves, little waves, bright days, dark days, Phil Edwards is the best surfer in the world, right?
Well, let's watch Phil Edwards then.
Phil really makes surfing look very easy. He has almost an effortless style, although he does some very difficult things. And you almost always find Phil in the perfect spot in any wave he's riding, which is right back in what we call the curl, which is the pocket between the white water and the green part of the wave. Here he is ducking underneath the curl.
Now, does he have to do that?
Well, if he stood up straight, he'd just be knocked off by
right off the
white water.
wave. Mm-hmm.
Right. He stands on the board almost like he's glued down. You're going through the white water and right out again. The whole object is to get back as far as you can in the white water and still be able to make it out in the green part of the wave, what we call the curl, or stay right in the place toward it. Here's Phil stalling out from the nose of the board. He'll slow it down when he's actually on the nose, stalls again from the tail, and trims it up in a split second. He can really move across these little waves. Phil seems to get more speed out of a board than any other surfer. He can trim that board perfectly.
What do you mean by trim? Have it in the exact balance?
Perfect balance with the water. You see the water coming off the rails here, just spraying straight back.
Rails are the sides, right?
Rails are the sides of the board, right. Phil also is one of the few people to turn and do some high-speed turns and get a lot of velocity on the big waves in Hawaii, like Sunset Beach here. Really maneuvering, even on the big waves. Most people just stand up, crouch down, and hope for the best in a big wave.
With Bruce Brown and myself, over here is Phil Edwards, considered the outstanding surfer in the world. Phil, tell me, how old were you when you first started surfing?
11 years old.
Is it necessary, do you think, to be a good surfer to start at an early age or not?
Well, like any other sport, it takes a long time to develop yourself doing anything.
Uh-huh. Well, what about this style, this functional style they say you have? Is that something that you developed yourself? And I know that most of the people follow your style right now.
Well, when I first started surfing, there was no thought to what the function of the sport was, and we just sort of had to make up as we went along. And I always admired the skiing, the beautiful way they come down with the speed, the turns, so forth, and I sort of try to pattern myself after a skier.
Speaking of speed, how fast do you think you go on a wave, anyway?
Yeah, that's something we argue about all the time. It's probably between 20 and 30.
What is the main danger, would you say, in surfing? It's a pretty violent sport, isn't it?
Yes, it looks much more dangerous than it really is, though. With the near accidents that we see every day, hardly anyone ever really gets hurt. I think probably the most dangerous thing would be the rocky bottoms in Hawaii with the big waves.
Tell me, for a new sport, surfing has acquired rather a bad name. Most people think of surfers as a bunch of wild kids called ho-daddies charging up and down a beach. How come?
Oh, those people are not the surfers. They're the hangers-oners. The surfers are out surfing. They're not causing any trouble.
Well, why? Do you think that's the only reason it's acquired this name or not?
Well, any new sport attracts a rebel-type person, and they'll make their presence felt more so than a more normal type.
Well, Bruce, how do you feel about this question?
I think a lot of the impression people have gotten about surfers that isn't really true is from Hollywood movies, which are based, like most Hollywood movies, not on fact, but on fabrication. And speaking of movies, in fact, Bud, let's take a look at some slow-motion stuff of Phil.
Looks like pretty good stuff to me, Bruce.
It's pretty good stuff. It's really give you a chance to analyze Phil's style of surfing, the things he does, and you can appreciate them really a lot more when you see them so slow. When he turns with his back to the wave here, this is the hardest kind of a turn to make in surfing. When you're facing the wave, it's much more natural feeling. Here's another turn when he's facing the wave. These turns with your back to the wave, you really have to commit yourself and lean way over, way off balance. If somebody reached out and grabbed your board, you'd fall right in the water, and what it really amounts to is he turns so hard and commits himself so far over the water that if the board doesn't whip around fast enough and come underneath him, he'd just be standing in the water.
It's extremely fluid and easy the way he surfs.
Right, and don't ask me how he does it. It's really amazing. Even here, standing on the nose, he just lets his arms hang down to the side. And then with split-second precision here, he just backpedals off the nose and pulls the nose up so it doesn't catch that little bit of chop and go underwater. He uses almost every muscle in his body when he turns. Watch him really crank one on here. Almost tears a hole in the water. He does it with such power. And here in the white water, one of the hardest places to ride, the wave is, the green part is kind of smooth and easy to ride. The white water is very difficult because it's so irregular.
Phil, it was just great watching you surf. Congratulations on the magnificent performance.
Thank you.
You can see why you're the world's best. Good luck to you. Well, Bruce, what other ways are there of riding waves?
Well, Bud, the thrill of riding a wave is there whether you're riding a surfboard or whether you're one of the few people in the world to surf in a sailboat.
But of course, no sailboat was actually designed to surf with. However, the best kind of a sailboat to ride waves with is a catamaran. These are Pacific catamarans, which are made here in California. And occasionally along the coast, when the surf is right, you'll see 2 or 3 Pacific Cats out there having a lot of fun riding waves. Watch the one over here on the left, almost has a collision.
A little expensive to have a collision with, aren't they?
Right, a surfboard, when you're riding a wave, it's not quite so much at stake. With a board, you have $100 to $150 invested. With one of these catamarans, you've got about $2,000 there on the line. So if you make a bad mistake, it's a little more expensive. Going through the surf like this is the hardest part of riding a wave in a catamaran. Because actually they have enough speed under sail that if there's a little bit of wind blowing, they can outsail the wave just with the power of their sails.
Whoops, he's broaching there.
He pulled it out right. This is Carter Pyle, who designs and builds the cats here. He's also an outstanding sailor and surfer, as you can see.
Will they swamp or not, Bruce?
No, they're self-bailing, so the water just comes in and runs right back out again. Here goes a young fellow named Mickey Munoz outside. Mickey's a top board surfer, body surfer. Also, he's good at sailing the catamarans in the wave, too.
How fast will they go down a wave?
About 20 miles an hour and about 2 miles an hour sideways, which he was doing there. They get going about 20 miles an hour. They have speedometers, and when you're in a wave, the speedometer will come out of the water, and it's hard to get an accurate reading.
Boy, they must be rugged to take that.
Right, gives you kidney trouble if you aren't careful.
Looks like Warren Miller is steering that one, isn't it?
It is Warren Miller, Bud. I know you know him well. He makes skiing films.
How long are these cats?
They're just under 20 feet. It's exciting riding a wave like this, and it's also exciting, as you can see, sailing back out when you go bouncing over the waves. The crew hiking out here just about slipped off. Occasionally there's some minor disaster. You get caught wrong in a wave. This can happen. It doesn't happen often, fortunately. The boat drifted into the rocks, and amazingly enough, it didn't harm the boat at all. They tipped it over and drug it up in the rocks. The rudders floated in a little while later. They put it back together, and next thing you knew, they were right back out surfing the thing again.
Well, hi, everybody. Bud Palmer, along with that sterling surfing photographer and surfer, Bruce Brown. And Bruce, why are so many surfers looking for new places all the time to surf?
Well, one reason, Bud, to just plain escape the crowds that have developed here in California surfing. The other reason, probably the most important, it's a challenge. There's kind of a new frontier there. You can go to a strange country and be the first person in the world or in history to ever surf there or even know anything about surfing in a strange country. Well, Bud, in the past year, I visited 15 or 20 different countries looking for places to surf. One of the places we went was to Japan. Now, it's very difficult to get any information prior to going to a place about the surf because surfing isn't done at all in Japan.
Well, that's interesting because being an island or a series of islands, you think there'd be lots of surfing over there.
There's no way you can get prior information before you go. You can't write a letter to somebody and say, hey, how's the surf in Japan? Because no one knows, and they could care less really over there how it is. So you go there and you just have to kind of, we'll look at a chart or a map and try and find what's the best part of the coastline to explore, first of all, where the reefs might be, what areas lined up to maybe catch the proper swell, and then visit that area first and keep your fingers crossed, hope for the best.
Is surfing that difficult to find all over the world?
It is, because the good days of surf are very rare, even in Hawaii and California. A really good day happens maybe 4 or 5 times a year. So if you're visiting an area for a week or a month, your chances are you won't be there on that good day. You have to be lucky to strike the good day.
Were you successful in Japan?
In Japan, we had fairly good luck, yes.
The 2 blokes I went to Japan with were Del Cannon here who was on vacation from college, and young Peter Johnson, who was on vacation from junior high school. Pete's only 12 years old. And when two surfers who aren't used to large cities end up in the largest city in the world with a couple of surfboards that no one in Japan had ever seen before, believe me, you really feel a little bit lost.
Well, some of the people seem quite curious about the boards there, aren't
I
they?
think they thought they were subversive weapons or something. You can't even begin to decipher the signs. They finally made their way out of Tokyo, which was quite a relief, and struck off following the sun, heading for the water. They knew which direction it was, and that's where they were headed.
Welcome to Japan.
From the time they arrived, they spent almost 2 days before they finally made it to a beach, using every means of transportation they could think of to get there. Pete got a little tired and picked up a ride in one of the farm carts there. Finally made it to their first beach, a place on the Chiba Peninsula across Tokyo Bay. It's called Katsura. They were pleasantly surprised to see a beautiful beach that was reminiscent of beaches we have in California here. There was some waves breaking at the beach. They paddled right out. The sign there might have said no surfing. They had no idea what it said. Paddled out, and Del was the first one to take off in a wave. He's also the first man in the history of the world to ever ride a wave on a surfboard in Japan.
It's amazing, Japan being surrounded by water, that they don't surf. Why don't they?
I don't know. They've never been exposed to it at all. They do a lot of swimming there. Of course, most of the population lives in the cities, and there's not many people along these coastal areas. It's pretty deserted. These are just resort areas that are good in the summer. There goes Pete, 12 years old, and a heck of a good surfer.
Well, what was the reaction on the beach when they started coming in on these waves?
People started gathering and pointing out. They didn't know what was really going on. They'd never seen it before or heard of it before. Japanese are pretty conservative people. They don't show their emotions, so they weren't really hopping up and down, going crazy like they did in some parts of the world. They were kind of amused at some of the amusing rides, though.
I can see why.
The Japanese people themselves don't go surfing. Of course, they don't go surfing at all. They completely close the beaches if the surf gets over 2 feet. Of course, this is considerably over 2 feet. Del riding a wave here. You can see the Japanese junk out there behind him, fishing boat going out to sea, I think.
They must have thought Del was crazy, didn't they?
I don't know what they thought. They had red flags flying, which meant the beach was closed. Of course, Del and Pete didn't know that, so they went out there and surfed. All of a sudden, they started blowing whistles on the beach, and people were yelling and screaming, and they finally came ashore to see what all the commotion was about. And the commotion turned out to be about them. The lifeguard there in the white undershirt and white pants thought they were trying to commit hara-kiri or suicide. They just couldn't see why anyone would be out there when the surf was big, since, as I mentioned, they don't go out if it's over about 2 feet. Pete was something of a local hero with his surfing ability. He got a girlfriend about the first thing. About a week in Japan, they got pretty well organized, got themselves a car, and started exploring more of the coastline up and down the Chiba Peninsula, which seemed to be the best area for surf that we came across.
Were people curious when they saw the boards on top of the car?
Right, they'd gather around, knock on the boards, and I think most people were looking at them as something to go fishing from rather than to surf on, since they're always looking for an economical means to go fishing. Here's another spot we found. It's called the Kamogawa Breakwater.
Well, these are bigger, these waves, aren't they?
A little bit bigger than the other spot. It changed. We were there about a month, and the surf here at Kamogawa was good about half that time, which is extremely consistent for surf, more consistent than most of the surfing spots in California. So from what we could observe and what we saw, the surf in Japan is very good. and I'm sure that they'll be surfing there shortly. In fact, I've gotten letters since our return, and they were already starting to surf in Japan. It's quite a problem, though, for the people to have a surfboard, say, in Tokyo, and then load it on a train with 1,000 other commuters and get to the beach. So I think surfing there will be done more on a rental basis. They'll have boards at the resort areas and then rent them to the people when they come out.
That's a nice ride by the 12-year-old Pete Johnson.
Right. Here's some shots I took sitting out in the water on my board as they came riding by.
Are you riding with him now?
Right, turned around backwards, riding along in front of Dell here. It's the best way to take pictures because you get to go surfing too. Pete didn't see Dell here, cut back, and then I, of course, jumped to save my own life. Fair-sized wave Dell's on here is probably about 6 feet. It got considerably larger than that one day at Kamogawa and completely closed out or broke all along the beach, so there was no way to get out. The surf gets really big. It's hard to find a place to ride because you have to find a very deep channel that you can paddle out to get to the surf to ride. When it did get this big, we covered as much of the coastline as possible and saw some waves that were well over 20 feet. I'd never seen surf bigger than this except in Hawaii. There was a typhoon making up offshore that caused these huge ground swells.
Now, those are impossible to ride, though. They're just breaking straight down, aren't they?
Straight down onto about a 2-foot rock shelf. Now, if we would have had 3 or 4 days of big surf like this, we could have explored that coastline and found some places I'm sure we could have ridden. But in the shorter time we had, the 1 day of big surf, and the limited amount of coastline you can explore, it's difficult to find a place. So far, the only place we found to ride big waves is in Hawaii, and that's where Dell and Pete were headed back to Hawaii to try and ride some big waves. Said goodbye to the people at the inn where they stayed. They went through this ritual every morning.
It's rather pleasant.
Right, the robes come with the room. Dell had to leave anyway because he was getting corns on his feet. He had the largest wooden sandals they had in Japan, and they still weren't quite big enough.
Well, tell me, Bruce, why do they get such big surf in Hawaii anyway?
Well, but it seems to be the relationship it has to the storm centers, which are in the Bering Sea, the Gulf of Alaska. It's lined up just right to catch the big swell, which is caused by these huge storms we have up there.
The huge winds blowing in the Bering Sea, 80 or 100 miles an hour, over a large fetch of ocean. The longer they blow, the bigger the swells will be. Cause these huge ground swells to form, come down, hit the exposed north shore of the island of Oahu, where most of the big wave riding is done, with almost their full force. Just about the right distance away. If it was, say, 1,000 miles further away, the swell would diminish in size. It wouldn't be this big. If it was closer to the storm centers, the swell would be too irregular, too bumpy, the waves, and you couldn't ride it then either.
What creates that great hollow in the waves?
The waves coming out of deep water onto a shallow shelf or a shallow beach. These huge waves, of course, are what the surfers go to Hawaii and wait almost a year sometimes to ride. Come through almost always in the winter. And although Pete's only 12 years old, he too rode some mighty big waves in Hawaii. Warmed up at Sunset Beach. Keep in mind, Pete's only 12 years old. He's 4 feet 2 inches tall, and he only weighs 80 pounds. He's also an excellent swimmer.
He'd have to be.
He even went out and rode Waimea Bay. I went out with him on the right there to give you kind of a size comparison. I got annihilated, and Pete almost made that wave. Then on another big wave at Waimea Bay, Pete, on a special board for big waves, negotiating the whole ride. Pete's big wave board only weighs about 18 pounds, where the usual big wave board weighs about 40 pounds. It's quite a thrill to ride a big wave. We asked Pete how he felt after he came over the top of that wave at Waimea Bay. Now this is Waimea Bay, Bud, where Pete rode, and where also a handful of surfers ride these huge waves. They surf over on the right-hand side there. There's a rock reef, and the waves hump up over the reef. Looking at it from about a half mile away on a cliff, you can see the big swells.
How long have they been riding here?
They've only started riding Waimea Bay since about 1957, although they've been surfing in Hawaii for hundreds of years. For many years, there was a taboo against Waimea Bay. It was a place in Hawaiian legend that was extremely dangerous, and it is extremely dangerous. In 1957, the first group of surfers from California ventured out and tackled the big waves at Waimea Bay. They survived, and so everyone kind of took the taboo off, and now it's turned into a rather famous big wave spot. They looked at these waves, though, for 10 years before they went out, so you can see why you wouldn't attempt to ride a big wave like this in Japan just looking at it one day. It takes you a long time to get up your nerve. There's a fellow just dove off body surfing Waimea, a pretty rare thing to do. It was a horrible wipeout. 5 surfers flying every which way. Nobody even got a scratch. It's the biggest danger getting wiped out in a big wave is getting hit by your board or someone else's board. It can really do a lot of damage when it's thrown with the force of one of these waves. He hangs onto his board and gets sucked, what we call, over the falls with it, and that's really a bad way to get wiped out. The most common sight you see at Waimea Bay is surfers arriving with their boards and then waxing up with paraffin wax. Rub it on the deck. It keeps your feet from slipping around on the smooth fiberglass. It also gives you a chance to look at the big waves and get up your nerve before you go out and ride. A situation like this, you don't need wax. What you need really is a ejection seat. Fellow riding a bellyboard, bud, which is about 1/3 the size of a real surfboard, getting a extremely long ride at Waimea Bay. Actually, a bellyboard will go faster than a surfboard because it doesn't have a limited hull speed. It's an unlimited hull speed there on a short bellyboard. It can go just as fast as the wave will push it.
Does he need the flippers?
He needs a little more wax is what he needs, a little more nerve, too. They use the fins, yes, to flippers to paddle the bellyboard out to sea, also paddle it with their arms. This is the actual speed of the waves. Get going about 20 to 30 miles an hour, and it seems like you're going about 130. Generally, we show you them in slow motion so you have a little better chance to see what's happening. It's very dangerous with 2 people on one wave when it's big like this. Should be just 1 per wave. It's a lot safer. Big surf is extremely rare. Here's a fellow in about 15 different positions on one wave. All of them were wrong, too. It only gets big like this at Waimea Bay about 2 or 3 times a year at the most. So it's the thing you can't practice very much, riding big waves. You have to go out and do well the day you ride. Here's a beautiful ride. He couldn't have been a foot further back toward the whitewater. He would have never made the wave. That wave is close to 30 feet high, which is almost the size of a 3-story building. Here's a close call.
Boy. Well, Bruce Brown, thank you very much for a very interesting surfing show.
Thank you, Bud. It was a pleasure to have you in California.
Well, Bud Palmer saying so long for myself and Bruce Brown from Dana Point, California. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you again next week.